I ask Senator Jackson, would you lead us in a word of prayer?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, our Father in heaven, thank you for bringing us together this day to do the will of the state of Georgia. Lord, bless the people that are with us in this room. Also, Lord, bless those Christian soldiers out there that we're here to help, that we're here to give some guidance, to hear that we're to give some inspiration. Lord, just bless this great state and all the people in it. Lord, let us leave this day making Georgia better. These are the blessings we say in your name. We all say, amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. Again, I welcome everyone to the study committee. It's been a while since we had our first meeting and our second meeting and our third meeting, and this makes our fifth and final meeting for this study committee. We have met in various locations across the state throughout this process so that we could talk to superintendents out of both the metro area and outside the metro area, and I've had a lot of good input and appreciate all those folks allowing us to be part of that and them to be part of what we're doing and giving us information so we could best come up with a plan and to come up with the final report of this committee. The final report of the committee, I hope everyone's had the opportunity to read over it. It was sent out to you, I believe, yesterday afternoon. And it's basically has the minutes of each one of our meetings that when we did meet, and then also it follows up with a final summary of findings and recommendations. And of course, that is the most important part of this, to make sure everyone's on this committee is read through that and agrees with the finding and recommendations as this came out of the minutes of our preceding meetings. Is there anybody? And then, of course, as I said, then Senator Tippins is offering the language to rephrase that first section under the general findings, raising the age, where it says raising the age. He's rewording that and adding those 5 bullet points underneath that, but everything else remains the same from thoughtful planning on forward. As the original final report. And so right now, I guess I'll open the questions. Any discussion or?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, sir.
There is general consensus from this body, from this study committee, that the mandatory age should be raised from 16 to 17. Am I correct, sir?
With condition.
Right, with conditions.
Right.
But am I right, Mr. Chairman Tippins?
Not to run concurrently, no, sir, because raising the age is an immediate effect, addressing broken students. And unless you can outline what's going to be different for an additional year to 17 years old, you're fixing problems that are precedent. If the testimony in the committees and all these 5 bullet points all come out of the testimony that were taken in committees, the hearings. All the speakers that spoke on the origination of dropout, they say it's the start of the 9th grade. So if a child's on a decline path toward dropout at the start of 9th grade, to think that you're going to mandate them to sit in a classroom for an additional year when the research clearly shows there's no correlation between an additional year in school and raising the graduation rate. It's more dependent on the individual child and the addressing of their issues before they get to 16 years old. So, I mean, if, to be honest with you, if somebody told me, so what's the most important thing, I'd say fix the deficiencies that we have in our delivery system before you start raising the age. The testimony in committees and the hearings also address the shortage of resources. So it's a question of resources. And if you're going to put resources into compelling people to come to school that don't want to come to school. That's like saying we're going to prepare a buffet for everybody, and everybody that comes by, we're going to force them to eat it. Well, that's not going to happen. And I don't think you're going to force children to learn. Learning is a choice. Attendance is a choice. And I understand you may gain 2 or 3 people, but your percentage of successful students, I don't believe you're going to see that. The return on the taxpayer's investment, like we see a return on investment of instituting intervention programs early on. I mean, I've watched K-12 education for a long time. I don't understand why we don't put more focus early on, because the warning signs are there. What's not there is the intervention. I think this committee needs to come out very strongly on intervention on one-on-one students. When we see warning signs, address them at that point. The best example I can give you, I'm in the construction business, run a lot of heavy equipment. We don't wait till an engine is knocking and fixing to come apart or shut down before we started trying to address the problem in the engine. And that's kind of the way these students are when they drop out when they're 16 years old. But we found out that preventive maintenance early on consistently in maintaining the equipment, keeping fresh oil and filters in it, the engine lasts about 4 or 5 times as long as it would ordinarily. And I think that's what early intervention is. It's preventive maintenance, and it's the cheapest money you can spend, the most effective money on return on investment. And that's why I won't tell you that I mean, whatever the will of the committee is, I'm not trying to impose on the committee, but to say we believe in we absolutely believe in mandatory, or raising the age of mandatory attendance to 17, and we're suggesting that to go along with it, or addressing these challenges these students face, but it's undefined. There's no guidelines. There's no guarantee. The only guarantee in it is you're going to raise the mandatory attendance age to 17. I really do not think that's going to solve the problem. I really think that part of the problem can be solved with the other options that we have for high school students who now can enroll in technical colleges if that's where their mind and their heart is when they're 16 years old and go. I did notice in the history of this, I think Senator Fort had a bill in 2013 said that the kids would be excused from that if they were enrolled in another program. But there's no guarantee of that. I think it's awfully hard to mandate kids that are 16 years old to be somewhere. One thing that I had concern about was, I know Senator, you had testified that the parents were responsible for them until they're 18. I mean,
17.
I think the report until they're 18. Until they're 18 years old, through their 17th year, the parents are responsible for them because they're minors.
Right, they're considered.
Okay, I'm not going to argue that point, but the fact of the matter is, I think you can talk to any Superior Court judge and just say you have so many parents that are not fulfilling their legal responsibility. And again, the question is, how are you going to enforce it? And that's my question. I'd love for every student that enrolls in elementary school or kindergarten to have a successful graduation. And I think the state's done an awful lot in the last 10 or 12 years on raising graduation rates. But even at that, you're going to have some people that just absolutely aren't going to go. And I really don't know how you're going to enforce it. I don't know what the penalties are going to be. I mean, you could give them out of school suspension, but they've already got that. So I mean, you're kind of limited on the options of how you're going to really make a kid be there that doesn't want to be there. And even the national studies have shown there's no great correlation between mandatory age attendance and graduation. And I agree. The indicator for the prison pipeline is the lack of the high school diploma, but seat time's not going to solve that. And that's the reason I wanted to address first, realizing where the problem is and addressing those problems early on in intervention. I think we'll gain a lot more return on investment by implementing successful intervention policies than we will mandating mandatory seat time. You may have their body, but unless you capture their hearts, you're not going to get much return on investment.
Back to my question. So I stated before, the general findings of this committee is that Georgia should raise the mandatory age limit. That's the general findings with certain requirements. Am I right, Mr. Chairman?
With conditional requirements.
Right.
In conjunction with increased requirements for early intervention and wraparound services.
That's my question. That is the general findings of this committee. Am I right, sir?
I don't agree with that.
Well-
Unless we see legislation
Mis-
that outlines exactly what's going to happen.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just stating what's written in the draft.
Pardon?
I'm just stating what's written in the draft.
I see what's written in the draft.
Right. You could disagree, but this is a draft of what the general findings of our study committee.
Well, it was a draft for input, and that's the reason I offered my alternative. Now, you can vote it down if you want to.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for giving me that choice. I
Well,
appreciate that.
It's clearly yours, and I acknowledge that. And we may not agree on it. I just personally don't think an additional mandatory year is a silver bullet that's held out to be.
But Mr. Chairman, I'll tell you something we do agree on. We do agree on that pre-K should be fully funded. If we're going to put the resources back in early intervention, that's in pre-K and kindergarten. And listening to you, I'm going to actually agree with you, Chairman Tippins. I think we should go all the way back and fully fund pre-K and kindergarten for all students in this great state, so that we don't get into this problem. Young people get in the 9th grade and they still reading on the 6th grade level. If we fully fund pre-K, that opens the door and avenue that all these young people have the opportunity to read when they enter 1st and 2nd grade, so they're not failing, they're not repeating 2nd and 3rd grade, and then reading on the 3rd grade and the 5th grade level at the time they're in that right class. But when we talk about increasing the high school dropout age from 16 to 17, this committee general findings are that Georgia should raise the mandatory dropout age with exception, with conjunction with increasing intervention services and wraparound services. So couldn't there be an amendment as this proceeds along to include wraparound services? Meaning so, Mr. Chairman, that if a young person decides that they don't want to continue the traditional track of high school education at the age of 16, they can go to an alternative site, whether it's an alternative school or vocational system, so they can continue their education until the age of 17.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Davenport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think I attended all of the study committees here in Atlanta, Savannah, Clayton County, and Cobb County, and I know that all of those counties except Cobb, there was a consensus there of people when they testified that Georgia should raise the age of mandatory education. I looked at Senator Tippins' recommendations, and some of them are valid, but the item that we had in here in this draft, general findings, raising the age, Georgia should raise the age of mandatory education, but only in conjunction with increased requirements for early intervention and wraparound services. And I don't think that should be taken out. I'm ready to support it with that in, but I'm not ready if it's taken out. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I see Senator Albers still hasn't arrived. He was in a long, lengthy meeting when I left him. So, but we still have. What would you like to do, Mr. Senator Tippins, with your amendment to the report?
Make it as a motion to amend the report.
Okay, I have a motion to amend the report,
The amendment is in, it's what we see, it's what we read now.
to amend the report that we have, that's in your folder.
Okay, okay, this is with this amendment.
Yes, to amend on the page, it says at the bottom of the very fine print,
To take out
On
that
page
and put
11.
that in.
on page 11 of the final, on the report.
Okay,
One is
I
12
see.
pages.
I see it, so,
My amendment is an updated recommendation, 11/03/2021. This is not a recommendation of the committee, this is an amendment to
Okay.
the,
Right, this
To the draft-
two-pager.
to the draft
Okay, got it,
findings.
got it.
And this is where he's,
oh, okay,
it's just to amend that area right there is what he's,
okay.
wishing to.
I see it now. I see it, yeah.
Just that one bullet point.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it now. I got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'll say this, I don't know that we have a finding and recommendation of the committee until we vote on them. I mean, this is a draft and it's, it's open for
But
discussion.
we have to vote on this today.
I
It's the-
understand, I
The
understand,
fifth and final
I
meeting.
understand.
So I'm wasting it. Welcome for any more discussion at the committee? Let me-
No more discussion. I mean, Mr. Chairman, no more discussion. I had the chance to review the report. I see the amendment before me now, but we all agree that the high school dropout is a true indication for the pipeline to prisons in Georgia, and not just in Georgia, in the rest of the state. So we need to start making positive changes to reduce this teenage to prison pipeline. And I think raising the mandatory dropout age is a good step in the right direction.
Senator Tippins, did yours mention raise the age
It's
in
mentioned,
conjunction with all the bullet points that you've?
yeah, mine doesn't, but it also talks about thoughtful planning. Says any legislation related to increasing the mandatory education age should outline a clear and reasonable plan for implementing and enforcing such a change, which may include a variety of efforts. If you'll notice that may include, it doesn't say it's going to, it says it may include it. Legislation should address any associated cost and designate which party or party should bear each administrative or financial burden. All this says is if you pass that bill, if you pass an age bill, that's what it should include, and I think that's what our study committee should be. I mean, I don't think that we can. I honestly do not think from the testimony and evidence that we had given in reading the minutes of the 4 hearings, we've not been given any evidence that shows raising the mandatory age anywhere has increased graduation rates. I mean, if it did, I'd feel differently about it. But I think, as some of our speakers pointed out, if you got a 16-year-old that has 4 or 5 high school credits and it takes 23 to graduate, it's they're not going to graduate when they're 17 years old. And I don't know that you're going to change their mind about it. To me, there is not a lack of evidence that would support a recommendation saying that we're going to raise the age, and solely by raising the age, we're going to reduce the prison pipeline. I realize there's a strong correlation there, but I'm not sure having a high school diploma is the cause of them being in prison. I think it's a concurrent condition and a common condition that you see, and many times because of the societal issues that our schools have to deal with in the lives of the kids. That's what wraparound services have shown. As I testified in Marietta, Marietta City Schools has instituted one of the best wraparound programs in the state of Georgia. But what they found out, that it's, you don't keep kids in school by making them stay in school. You keep kids in school by identifying what their problems are and try to help them work through those problems. And they've had a pretty good success rate on doing that. But it's the identification and intervention that makes the difference, that makes them want to stay in high school, or even facilitates them being able to stay in high school. Some kids have to work, or they feel like they have to work financially to help their family. But we did not take a shred of evidence that I could see in the hearing that leads you to the conclusion, if you raise the mandatory age to 17, you're going to increase graduation, or you're going to reduce the prison pipeline. We don't have any evidence to correlate that.
Well, we do have, there was the testimony, and I'll just add this, testimony of the superintendents in the majority of the jurisdictions we went to that all were in favor of raising the age with additional funding for services. That's what led us down the path of understanding that using the milestone data and looking at those kids that are in 5th and 6th grade, looking at them then to identify those kids that are already tracking toward dropping out of school when they were 16.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't, the meetings that I attended, the study committees I attended, the superintendents not only thought it was a good idea, but thought it was a necessary idea, not just to raise it, but also give them the opportunity to go to alternative programs once they get to be 16, not maybe graduate, but be able to get some job skills, maybe at a technical school that was close by, or an alternative school that could teach them job skills, so that once they complete their high school education, whether with a degree or with a degree or not, they have some sort of skills that they can be useful citizens and taxpayer citizens in this great state. But to just let them walk out the door at 16, where they can't find a job paying a livable wage, we're not only doing a harm to that student, but we're also doing harm to this great state.
Well, let me ask you this, Senator Tippins: would you consider offering your language as an amendment in addition to language that's currently there? Under the raising the age, Georgia should raise the age of mandatory education, but only in conjunction with an increased requirement for early intervention and wraparound services. The study committee, after hearing such testimony, reviewing the compelling educational research on raising mandatory age, finds, and then having your 4 bullet points.
I guess my question is, which comes first?
Well, I think that the language that says, but only in conjunction with, means that they have to come together in a legal sense.
Well,
I'm not a lawyer, but I played one on TV once.
In thinking about it, when you enact legislation, is your legislation going to be broad enough that it's going to cover the wide array of reasons that kids drop out of high school? It can't. I mean, the truth of the matter is. And either you're going to raise the age uniformly across the state. You can make suggestions about what's going to happen, but ultimately it's going to be to the local school district. And the comment was also made dependent on funding. Well, you know, is the legislature going to raise? What if you do like many other programs we've had? You approve a program, but it's never funded. I think your funding has to be there. And I think from a standpoint of just good policy, you need to look at return on investment and see what the guaranteed return on investment of the investment is. I would love for every student to finish high school.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also seen, probably not as many as the chairman has seen, rebellious teenagers. If they make up their mind that they're not going to go to school, they're not going to go to school. The fact that you've got a state law and you have very little recourse against them, you have very little means of enforcing it. What are you going to do? Tell them you're going to send them to juveniles, YDC? if they don't go. I don't know how you enforce it.
Well, I think that would be depending on the legislation that comes forward that actually, but to enforce that, that's within the code system right now in the highway force. How do you enforce a 16-year-old?
And I think according to the testimony that we had given, it's a challenge that they enforce it with 15-year-olds.
I've had my run-in with rebellious teenagers, as many of you on this panel and in the audience have, in my own household.
I'm sure everybody.
Yeah, in my own household, I've had rebellious teenagers. But the choice is today, we can keep on doing the same thing that we've been doing in this great state by allowing young people to drop out at the age of 16, or Georgia can make a move forward and do something that we know that will be good for young people, be good for the public, be good for the common good of this great state, by putting a mandate to saying that you're going to have to stay in school till you're 17. You don't have to stay in a traditional high school, but at the age of 16, you will be allowed the alternative to go to alternative school or to a technical school to learn some skills, so that when you leave our educational system, that you have a skill or some sort of job training that you will no longer be a burden on this great state. I think that's what this bill says. And that's what I heard from the testimony when I went around this great state.
Well, so, Sir Tippins, what did you, when I asked about, what did you, adding your language in conjunction after raising under that first bullet point, would you object to your language being
No, I wouldn't object.
in addition to?
I wouldn't object to it being added. Maybe Georgia legislatively in a legislative process should consider it, but I'm not sure that it needs to be an absolute hard fact. We're going to raise the mandatory age regardless, because I just don't think the other criteria. I don't think passing the bill, I don't think you're going to guarantee that those supports happen.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Tippins, so you're comfortable with where we are now with 16 being allowed to drop out?
I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm not sure this legislation is going to stop them from dropping out if they want to drop out. I don't think the kids are going to school when they get mobile, when they get an automobile, if they have an automobile and they have other options, if their heart's dropped out, their bodies are going to be dropped out. I'm not comfortable with that, but I think, you know, the law may be a symbolic gesture where you're saying this is what we'd love to see happen. I'm not sure how much effect it's going to have. I think our research tells us our cost estimates are $21 million a year to raise it to 17. I'd rather see that $21 million a year be put into intervention programs. I think it'll gain you more positive outcomes in the long run.
And what specific education programs are you? Because even when you mentioned specific education programs, but I mean, even the ones you've got here are listed generically. I mean, as far as like,
I don't think it's our job as a committee to dictate a particular program, because I think local boards of education are in charge of the curriculum. But I do think that everyone in education would agree that you have early warning signs, And I know when the first conversations I heard was, well, we need to do more in middle school. Well, your early warning signs are in elementary school. And if you wait until middle school, a kid may already be 3 or 4 years behind their peers. And that's part of the reason that I think if you let a child get into high school that's 16 years old and they have 4 or 5 credit hours, there's no way in the world they're going to graduate other than if they enroll in the Senate Bill 204. They may be able to pick up the 4 other credits they need and go to technical college, which is great, which I think they ought to be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I just...
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Chairman Tippins about early warning signs. I think the early warning signs are really in first grade, first and second grade. That's why we really need to put our focus on fully implementing and fully funding pre-K for every child in this great state. But that's 12 years before we start. Well, that's at least 14, 15 years before we see any sign of that really working. But but what we're concerned with now is that we can continue what we're doing and allow young people to leave our educational system at 16, which I don't think it gives. I don't think it is good for us as a state entity to allow children, and their children at 16, just to walk away with no skills, with no educational opportunities, and most of them won't be able to get a job paying a livable wage. And it is truly a pipeline to prison when we allow young people to walk out. I spent a number of years working in jails and prisons, and it's about 50%, and more than 50% of young people in jails that would tell you they did not graduate high school. And I think it's a direct correlation. But if we somehow could increase the dropout age, a mandatory 17, it will be a step in the right direction. I remember a while back when we passed the seatbelt law. I remember people didn't want to wear their seatbelts because they were comfortable not wearing seatbelts. And the law was you couldn't mandate people to put on seatbelts. And I had a good friend, Tom Murphy. We even put a provision in to so that trucks wouldn't be included, so he can continue riding his trucks without a seatbelt. You remember that, Ms. Tippins? All right, but
pickup trucks.
Right, pickup trucks. Right, pickup trucks. For cars you had to wear seatbelts. For pickup trucks, you didn't have to wear seatbelts. But what we found was that people didn't like it. But we found was that seatbelt law saved lives. It saved lives. People didn't like it. People thought that we should let people do what they want to do. And this bill is just like the seatbelt law. We're allowing 16-year-olds to do what they want to do. And for the far vast of children, it works because they have good family background. They're self-motivators. But there are a number of Georgians, 16 and under, that don't have that motivation, that they need a little kick in their butt. They're saying that we won't let you out of educational institution until you're 17. You're going to either have to learn a skill or you're going to have to go on and graduate. I think this is the best move for our great state. This is a seatbelt bill. It saves lives.
Senator Albers. Well, I've lost there it is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. We're wrapping up our Public Safety Committee meeting. I appreciate all the time that you and all the committee members have spent on this issue. I find it to be extraordinarily important. And as mentioned back about 8-10 years ago, I actually sponsored this exact bill for several years of raising the age, and I am a big fan of it. I think it gets back to some consistency. You, as a parent, your 16-year-old can't go out and make medical decisions for themselves, but we're going to allow them to quit school. 16-year-old can't go buy a 6-pack of beer. They can't buy a pack of cigarettes. They cannot vape. They can't buy chewing tobacco. They can't go into a rated R movie. They cannot vote. They cannot do all the things that adults can do because they are not adults. They cannot join the military. They cannot service in action. So why would the one thing a 16-year-old can do, the very one thing, they can't even get a full adult driver's license yet, be quitting school, which we know is the linchpin to their future success? And we know what happens when a kid doesn't graduate high school. The percentages of them that will end up in the criminal justice system or a product of the social services system skyrockets. And well, in addition, their children will almost always not graduate. However, that one thing, if they graduate from high school, will change those statistics almost to nothing, and their children will almost certainly graduate. I appreciate all the testimony we heard from a lot of people, but this is the greatest no-brainer in the history of no-brainers. It's time. We need to move forward. Let's not be the last to do this. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? I guess now I will call for the will of the committee. Or I'll just ask you, Senator Tippins has made a motion that we accept his, in addition, or his supplement in lieu of that line 1. Is there a second?
The quick discussion. I think Senator Tippins brings up some valid points in here, but I wouldn't want it to necessarily replace that. I think we could potentially add some of that content to it, but I would not be in favor of changing the first bullet, which I think is critically important.
Would someone like to make that?
I would
As a
offer a substitute
subsequent
motion to add the supporting language. I think Senator Tippins brings up very good points that these things are important, but ultimately I think, from my perspective, I'd like to see the findings begin with bullet number 1, which is most important.
All right. Senator Tippins? Or do you have, what do you?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right.
Was that a motion, Mr. Chairman?
Do what?
Was that a motion?
It's a subsequent motion.
I second the motion.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Anybody disagree? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so we'll add Senator Tippins' language to following what's currently in there. Raising the age of Georgia children Georgia should raise the age of mandatory education, but only in conjunction with increased requirements for early intervention and wraparound services. And study committee, after hearing much testimony and reviewing compelling educational research for raising the mandatory age, finds there is a wide array of factors leading students to the decision to drop out of high school. Many factors are in evidence as early as elementary school by available indicators such as specific learning deficiencies and other academic and social nature. The testimony received was consistent with the viewpoint that the pathway to dropping out of high school is clearly established by the start of students' 9th grade year of study. Early intervention to those early warning indicators is critical to transform struggling students from failure to one who can enjoy a successful academic experience, which enables them to lead an adult life that benefits them and society. The solution for addressing the academic needs of an individual student is clearly not to be found in a one-size-fits-all approach. All right, now we will move to pass the vote on the.
I move to pass the study committee report as amended.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to amend the to accept the study committee report as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed,
No.
like sign.
No.
We have all in favor, 1 no. Having no other business before this committee, we will call this meeting adjourned. I thank you all for your service on this study committee. Before we adjourn, thank you for all and for the travels. and for coming all the way up Northwest Georgia, and, you know, and coming and running all over the state. But I think it did us well to get a good sampling from our own districts, because our districts represent such a wide variety of Georgia. Thank you for all your effort. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate everyone here today. And we will call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.